Hi everyone, I'm David from Malaysia, and you may know me as Blog Junkie on Twitter. I run a small WordPress support company called ClickWP, and I've been working with WordPress for over 10 years and the Genesis framework for maybe the last 5 years. So thanks for tuning in to my short talk for Genesis Camp 2015. We're going to be learning a really useful technique to speed up your theme with the WordPress Transients API. So to speed up your WordPress site, we can cache, which is a fancy word for saving, the output generated by WordPress so that we can reuse it later. So this relieves WordPress from working so hard and saves time assembling pages on the fly. In this lesson, we'll learn how to cache fragments of pages and chunks of data with which WordPress can reuse. So WordPress has a Transients API, which makes it super easy to cache small chunks of data. WordPress will even store transients in RAM if available in your server for extra speed. Using transients can also improve the performance of caching plugins. So either way, it's a good idea to cache data with the Transients API to help speed up your site. So the Transients API is really easy to use. There are three main functions: set transient, get transient, and delete transient, which are all pretty self-explanatory. When we set a transient, we need to pass it three parameters. The first is the transient name, which is just a string, and the transient value can be any sort of data. So anything from simple variables to more complex arrays and objects. And the final parameter is how many seconds to store the data for. So um, this last point is important. Note that the Transients API is meant to store data that will expire. It's not permanent, hence the name, transient. And if you want to store permanent data, you should use the options API instead. So this is the general use pattern for transients. First, we check to see if the data that we need already exists as a transient. If it does, then we just output the cache data. And if the data doesn't exist, we'll generate or we get the data and then we cache it. Now, the next time that we need to use this data again, it already exists because we've cached it and then we just output the data. Now we'll take a look at a practical example of how to use the Transients API. Many teams like Metro Pro, Magazine Pro, News Pro, and even Foodie Pro use widgetized homepages. The homepage are made up of widget areas like this. In Metro Pro, we have home top, home middle left, home middle right, and home bottom. So there's four widget areas, and each of the widget areas have a featured post widget. This means that WordPress needs to run the loop at least 4 times to generate this homepage. As a result, takes about 61 queries and 21 something milliseconds to generate this page. These stats are provided by the Query Monitor plugin, and it shows you the page generation time, peak memory usage, and so on. So we're going to try to improve on these numbers with the Transients API. So here's the fun part. We're going to jump into the code editor, and we're going to open up frontpage.php for Metro Pro. This is the page, this is a template file that displays the home page for this theme. And the specific function that we're interested in is the Metro homepage widgets function. This is the function that generates the widget areas for the homepage. So we're going to optimize this with the Transients API. And the first thing you do, if you remember from our general use pattern, we're going to check to see if the transient exists. So we'll have to create a variable. We'll call it Metro homepage content. And the value of this variable is the transient. We're going to call the transient the same as the variable. And this just helps keep things consistent and keeps us straight. And so now we can refer to our transient with a variable name. So the first step, if we're going to check if the homepage content exists, we'll do that with an if statement. We'll do that with an if statement. I'll just jump down here and end the if statement. And I'm going to indent the code for clarity. So we're checking to see if the transient exists. And because the transient doesn't exist, it's going to run the code inside the if statement. Page doesn't exist. So we're going to be running the code in here, and we want to capture the output of the code. We want to capture the output of the widgets. So we're going to use output buffering. And we'll do that with the obstart function. Output buffering saves the response from PHP into a temporary buffer. And we do this because we want to wait till the response is complete before we send that response to WordPress. So we'll do that by starting right here above the widgets, right before any widgets are generated. And the buffer is complete, the response is complete once the last widget is generated. So now we can save homepage content as a variable, and this variable we'll just call it Metro homepage content again, and the value of this variable is the value stored in the buffer. So we'll get the value stored in the buffer with the ob get contents function. And finally we want to empty the buffer and stop output buffering. We'll do that with the obn clean function. Now we can save the transient. We want to save the transient for 12 hours, right? And we'll do that with the set transient function. The string name, the name of the function is Metro home page content. The value of the transient is the variable that contains the HTML of the home page, and the expiration time is 12 hours in seconds. So we could do 12 times hours in seconds. This hour in seconds is a constant that WordPress provides so that we can easily calculate 12 hours in seconds. So let's quickly recap the code. We'll create a variable for the transient, and then we can check if the transient exists. So if this returns false, the transient doesn't exist, and then we'll need to generate the widgets. We store the widget output in a output buffer, and we save it to a variable called Metro homepage content, and then we save Metro homepage content as a transient of the same name as well. Finally, we want to output the cached data, and we do that simply by echoing the variable out. So I'm going to save this, and now we'll go back to the home page, and I'm going to refresh this page. So the first time that the code is run, the results aren't going to be different much. We see that it also took about 60 something queries to generate this page, but we do see that a transient was set. And the transient that was set is the Metro homepage content transient, which is what we created. So now that the transient is set, this means that when we refresh the page again, WordPress doesn't have to do as many WordPress database queries to generate the home page. And we see that the number of database queries that were required was down to 24, and the time spent querying the database has now dropped to just over 8 something milliseconds. So with just a few lines of code, we have reduced the effort to generate the content of the home page by more than half. And that's pretty cool. Now, we can actually view the content saved in the transient by using the Transients Manager plugin. And the Transients Manager plugin shows us all the transients saved on the site. And here's our Metro homepage content transient. we see that it's set to expire in 12 hours, and if we edit it, we'll see it contains the HTML from the widgets. Okay, we've done really well, but there's still one more step for this lesson. Let's try to change the widget settings. I'm going to remove the widget from home top, and so now we expect that there won't be a featured post widget in home top, but on the home page, even if I refresh the page, this widget still exists here. So the reason why is because we saved the transient for 12 hours. The transient has not yet expired, so WordPress is still showing the cache data. What we need to do now is to provide a mechanism to refresh the cache when widget settings are saved. So to do this, we jump into functions, we go to Metro, functions, and at the bottom of the file, I'm going to add a function to delete home page transient. We're going to call our function metro delete home page transient, and in it we're going to call the delete transient function and the name of our transient. Now we need to hook this to an action hook that will fire when the widget settings are saved. So you're familiar with Genesis hooks, but this time we're going to use a WordPress hook. And that So this WordPress hook that we're going to use is called update option. This update option hook is fired whenever any settings are saved to the database, including whenever we change any settings in the widgets. So for good measure, we also hook this to save post and to delete post, so that the cache is deleted when posts are updated, published, or deleted. Let's test our handiwork. I'm going to go to change the settings in a widget. I'll I'll put back the featured story widget, but I'm going to remove the featured image. So now, success. Okay, so we see that the featured image has disappeared, and we can see that the cache was deleted because WordPress is back to using 60 something database queries again. But when we refresh the page, it drops down to 20 something, so we know that the home page content is being cached again. Let's just double check that, have the featured image appear again, and there we go. Okay, great. So there you have it. This is a pretty simple way to improve the performance of your team with the Transients API. Just remember to include a way to delete the transient before it expires, and you should be good to go. So in addition to caching HTML fragments like in this lesson, you can also use the Transients API to cache data from external services. For example, WordPress uses transients to check if the plugins on your site are outdated. And you can also use transients to store results of complicated database queries. So I have saved the code snippets at this URL, clickWP.me/gc-transients-API. And here are some additional resources for you to learn about it. Um, Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this lesson useful. And please follow me on Twitter and check out my website at clickwp.com. Thanks.